If you have ever pretended to open an automatic sliding door at a grocery store using the Force, if you have ever had a lightsaber duel with a sibling or a best friend, if you have ever joked about the Force not being strong in somebody, then you are most definitely in the right place. Today we're going to be counting down the top 5 film projects that we would like to see in the future from the Star Wars franchise. For this particular list, we're only going to be looking at film projects, and every single one of these is technically a spin-off. Some of these may already be future potential projects. There may be rumors out there. However, at the time of me recording this, there is nothing concrete. There's nothing solid. As is always the case, this is my personal opinion. Let me know in the comment section what film projects you would like to see from Disney in the foreseeable future. Now let's get straight into it with number 5, and I'm going to go with the Count Dooku origin story. I think my appetite for something like that really got awoken with the Jedi Tales series. As you guys know, if you guys watch it on Disney Plus, there are 3 episodes that basically total kind of an origin story for Count Dooku. We get introduced to some new characters. We get to see his transition from a Jedi all the way up to his betrayal and his disdain for the Jedi Council. And even though I named this particular spot a Count Dooku origin story, I feel like there could be a lot more of an expansion, maybe explore more of his interactions with Mace Windu and also his interaction with other characters, for example with Yaddle and Qui-Gon. As I said before, we got a little bit of a taste of what it could be with the animated Jedi Tales series that came out about a year ago. However, I still think that they could easily expand on that and even go further into the exploration of Dooku's mindset after Qui-Gon had fallen to Darth Maul in episode number 1. Either timeline makes perfect sense if they want to do something pre-episode 1, as I mentioned, where he's maybe training Qui-Gon and they find a really young Obi, or one that explores a little bit after the events of episode number 1. Number 4, we continue to kind of blur the lines here because we already saw General Grievous in a number of different projects. He was obviously featured in Star Wars episode number 3, but also in the 2D animated series, as well as the Clone Wars animated series, which ran for a total of 9 seasons. So we definitely got to explore the character's psyche, his motivations. We also got a glimpse at where his loyalties lie, really. But I still think there's a little meat on the bone there. There's a little bit more to explore. I think those of us hardcore Star Wars fans would really like to know a little bit more about his origin story, where he came from, and how he became a general. His story was expanded on quite a bit, primarily through the novels that were based on the prequel trilogy and also some random comic books that actually kind of briefed us a little bit more on his backstory. However, most of those books and comic books and novels went on to be passed off as legends. They aren't canon anymore. It would be nice if an origin film kind of went over how he became this 6-armed droid, and then also kind of brief us on all the conquests that he had conquering Jedis. Moving on to number 3, we're going to be talking about at least one more Anakin project. I still think that there's a little bit more story there, even though we have seen him, as I mentioned, in the animated series, 9 total seasons, and then obviously in the prequel trilogy, and then obviously we saw him as Darth Vader in the original series. However, there were some massive gaps, primarily with a younger Anakin. I think I can speak for a pretty big majority of the fan base when I say that I would love to see Anakin as a young kid training, picking up a lightsaber, maybe interacting with Mace, Obi-Wan, and a little bit of more Jar Jar Binks in there. We can obviously never have enough Jar Jar. I think there's still quite a bit of story, primarily after the episode of Phantom Menace. As I mentioned, Clone Wars basically tells the entire story of Anakin in his early to mid-20s, but we just don't have enough content of him as an early kid. Like I said, first time that he picks up a saber, first time that he really starts to hone in on his Force capabilities. Only time will tell if we ever get a project like that in the works from Disney. Moving on to our second spot on the list, and we're going to be talking about one more project that has been thrust, or one other storyline that has been thrust into the Legends category. It is no longer canon. However, the story of Starkiller is a really fascinating one for those people that actually play the Force Unleashed video game. You guys will be very familiar with the secret Darth Vader apprentice. It is a fascinating story, and recently we've seen Hasbro kind of pick up on where the video game left off. We've seen them go back and pick up a lot of the merchandising, a lot of the product, a lot of those characters, primarily a lot of, like, for example, the Scout Troopers and a lot of the droids that were featured in the game are now being brought into their main action figure line. So I think there's a lot of interest from the hardcore fans. There are also some rumors out there that potentially they could actually remake the video games, or somehow fit them or port them into the newer consoles, with updated graphics and features and things of that nature. So there's definitely enough fan support to bring this back to life or bring it back into canon. It's a little bit more difficult, specifically because Obi-Wan, the series, kind of featured a little bit of what happens between episode number 3 and New Hope. So I think it does make it a little bit more difficult to bring him into the canon universe, but I still think there's a pretty big window there to work with, maybe bringing him in as a late teenager, build him up, and then obviously we know that he eventually ends up sacrificing himself for the rebel cause. So hopefully we're able to see something like that. As I mentioned before, I think this one is kind of a long shot, primarily because, as I mentioned, Disney basically wrote him out of the Star Wars lore or the history. And even though we've seen numerous projects try to bridge the gap between episode number 3 and number 4, primarily with Obi-Wan more recently, how they tried to tell a little bit of what was happening in between the two. Same thing with Rogue One, although Rogue One plays off just before the start of New Hope, literally moments before. So I still think that there's a big giant gap there that could perfectly fit in a Starkiller storyline, kill him off within that same film, and not really retcon or intrude on any of the Star Wars lore we know and love. Moving on to our top spot on today's list. Our top spot on the list is actually going to be a little bit vague, but we're going to be looking at Order 66. I would love to see another project revolving around that particular time of the Star Wars lore, just primarily because, yes, we have gotten a lot of media revolving around the event, whether it's Clone Wars towards the end, or the last few episodes of Clone Wars, or a little bit in Bad Batch. Episode 3 obviously revolves heavily on Order 66 and the build up towards it, but I don't feel like there's enough to it. This is supposed to be probably the biggest event in the Star Wars universe. This is where finally Anakin becomes Darth Vader, where Palpatine takes power, where all of the clones turn against the Jedi. It was supposed to be this big grand event, and I feel like for the most part it's skimmed over. It's not explored as much. I still feel like there's a little bit more to be told, maybe from different perspectives, different angles, or different parts of the galaxy that were affected in multiple different ways. Maybe not so much about the Jedi or Palpatine and his troops, but more so people that had nothing to do with either one, that really didn't have a side to choose. I think it would be really interesting to kind of explore that furthermore in the future. So that is our list for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for listening to me rant and just spit saliva and oxygen everywhere. Stay tuned, because we do plan on doing a lot more Star Wars content. It's something that I kind of have neglected, even though it is a pretty big part of the channel. So stay tuned. Let me know in the comment section what movie project you guys would love to see from Star Wars. Let me know in the comment section. Stay safe out there. I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you.